September 18th, 2012, and this is the third episode of the Revolutionary Journal. Before we begin, I would like to announce some changes to the show. From now on, it will be a download-only show, as while SoundCloud is great, it provides me with a limited amount of space, and I cannot afford a premium account. Regarding the setup of the show, I decided to have the show set up in 2 seasons. Each season will constitute about 4 months worth of episodes, or around 16 shows. Once the season has concluded, a folder will be made of all the episodes and be freely available for download, so you won't be able to ever miss an episode. Once season 1 has begun, and will end in late December. I will then be taking a brief vacation for the show starts up in late January. Today I would like to talk about several things, namely food speculation, the attacks on the U.S. consulate in Libya, as well as the attacks on the U.S. Egyptian embassy, and know some good news about banks. Let's begin. The revelation that banks have been profiting off of speculating on food prices has come up recently in the news. It was reported by The Independent on September 1st that, quote, Barclays has made as much as £500 million in 2 years from speculating on food staples such as wheat and soy, palming allegations that banks are profiting handsomely from a global food crisis. Barclays is a UK bank with the greatest involvement in food commodity trading and is one of the 3 biggest global players, along with the US banking giants Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Research from the World Development Movement points out, end quote. Thus, this prompts several questions. How does food speculation work? And what started food speculation? How does food speculation affect the price of food and therefore people around the world? What attempts have there been to curb food speculation? Finally, is it possible to stop or get around food speculation? Let's cover the first question. How does food speculation work? In order to answer that, we must first gain an understanding of how speculation itself works. For that answer, go to the aforementioned World Development Movement website, which states that speculation begins with futures contracts. Such contracts, quote, allow farmers to agree to a guaranteed price with a buyer for their next harvest well in advance, giving them greater certainty of income when planting crops. In a sense, a futures contract is a form of insurance against price changes. In financial terms, it enables a farmer to hedge their risk. Futures contracts can be traded on futures markets with other farmers, food buyers, or speculators. Speculators aim to make money by buying and holding onto the contracts, seeking to profit from changing prices. Having a degree of speculation helps these markets function, making sure that farmers have someone to pass their risk on to. End quote. This can have an effect on food prices. Grain.org reports that, quote, the greater the demand for a futures contract, the more its price will rise. With it will also rise the price which is estimated that food will have on a future date. This impacts the current real price of food, upwards of course. The same phenomenon occurs the other way around when the futures contract's price goes down. End quote. Futures contracts are beneficial as they aid farmers and buyers by establishing a guaranteed price. This in turn helps consumers as it gives them price stability. However, when speculators get involved, the situation becomes harmful as the main goal of the speculator is, as was stated, to make money from the change of prices, leading to an increase in the price of food. Now on to the second question, who and what started food speculation? For my American listeners, according to The Ecologist, a British environmental publication, your and my neighborhood-friendly and oh so respectable Goldman Sachs started speculating on food in 1991. That was sarcasm, by the way. The story goes that J. Aaron & Co., Goldman's commodities trader, wanted to enter into a swap with a pension fund that wanted to add commodities to its portfolio as a way to manage its financial risk. Goldman was willing to do the deal as a speculator. However, J & Co. could only do so much before crossing the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which had limits on positions that could be held by speculators. Just an aside, According to Investopedia, a position is defined as the amount of a security either owned or borrowed by an individual or a dealer. In other words, it's a trade. In other words, it's a trade an investor currently holds open. This and all other sources will be in the show notes for this episode. But back to the story. J. Aaron didn't want to invest in a single commodity, or rather wanted to invest in commodities as an asset class, and buy into a number of commodities. The ecologist goes on to say that, quote, so Goldman created an index that would track prices of a predetermined selection of commodities, allowing index fund buyers a way to speculate in physical goods. That let the pension fund manage its risk, often backing that index by buying up the actual futures of the foods, fuels, metals the index covered. To make sure futures holdings match the investment, Goldman asked the CFTC for exemption from speculative limits on crop futures under a loophole Congress had opened in the 1980s. The CFTC granted the request. Investment banks could buy crop contracts just like a wheat merchant. Food no longer made for just a balanced diet. Balanced portfolios too, opening the doors for millions of investors to have a personal stake in food and energy markets beyond like groceries and gas tanks. End quote. For more information on this, look at the Foreign Policy article entitled How Goldman Sachs Created the Food Crisis. As we can see, since 1991, food has been used as a tool to increase the wealth of a few at the expense of, as we will see, the many. Food speculation can have widespread effects all over the world. Generally speaking, however, for you and me, the increase in food prices may be an inconvenience, almost somewhat problematic, whereas for many poor people around the world, it can mean the difference between life and death. In April of this year, The Independent shared the stories of several people around the world who have been affected by rising food prices. One story went as follows. Violet White-Hira is a Kenyan, unemployed single mother looking after her 8-year-old daughter and an 83-year-old father. When prices rose sharply in Kenya recently, the family was forced to drastically cut back. They stopped eating lunch, did the little we had to eat for supper. We drank tea without sugar. Sometimes we also missed breakfast. I had to travel so much to wash clothes to get money for food, but sometimes I was so weak I fell down. For supper, we had only 1 or 2 cups of flour mixed with water and salt. End quote. While some might argue that this is just how the market works, speculators are useful, such as Sarah Williams argued in a 2010 article, which stated that the primary purpose and good thing about speculators is the smoothing out of resources and risk, therefore prices. I think that when the question of people's lives is on the line, and the question of are people going to be in a hard situation such as the one that was just mentioned, there's a moral aspect to the situation. Those people and those in power have the duty to ensure that the potentially harmful acts, such as speculation, are regulated, as to ensure that people are not being harmed. It is even more important when one acknowledges that major shifts in food prices cause in countries, as we saw from 2007 to 2008, in which there were 40 food riots across the world. Thus, this brings us to the final 2 questions. 1. What has been done to address food speculation? And 2. Is there a way to get around food speculation? The UN has made an attempt to deal with food speculation. The Guardian stated in a June 2011 article that the UN put out a report in which it was stated that government intervention may be needed to burst the huge bubble that has developed in price of commodities such as food staples and oil. The report also implicated speculators, saying, investors are encouraged to behave like a herd, says the report, with few incentives to arbitrage or bet against the tide of rising prices. Without checks and balances in the system, investors create price bubbles that put many basic food steps out of the reach of millions in the developing world. End quote. The report in question that's being quoted is entitled Price Formation in Financialized Commodity Markets, the World of Information, we link to in the show notes. In an interview this year, UN Food and Agricultural Chief Jose Graziano da Silva stated to Der Spiegel that food speculators do play a destructive role, thinks that industrialized countries should finally open their markets and get rid of their agricultural subsidies. To illustrate this point, use an example. Quote, when the United States decided to end subsidies for corn-based ethanol last summer, price of corn dropped immediately. It was felt in poor countries like those in Central America, where corn is used for both food consumption and the feeding of livestock, and in Eastern Africa, where corn is a key staple. The American decision had a direct and positive effect on food situation. End quote. However, thus far, the Union has pushed for the regulation of food speculation, but not much else. A potential solution to food speculation is food sovereignty, which is defined as people in sovereign states being able to democratically determine their own agriculture and food policies. The concept supports an increase in smallholder farming and more ecologically friendly means of production. It's not anti-trade or anti-technology, but locally based food is prioritized and corporate control of agriculture is rejected. Personally, I think that this is a great idea as it puts the power back into the hands of the people. It turns out on the national level, countries are no longer at the mercy of speculators. However, there's much to be done if we are to avoid a global food crisis, which is a possibility with the New England Complex Systems Institute when it appears a crop shock will arrive even sooner than they predicted due to drought. Less measures to curb ethanol production or any speculators are adopted immediately. Now to switch gears to a more recent topic, the attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Egypt and the U.S. Consulate in Libya. There have also been attacks and protests in Yemen, Sudan, and Tunisia. The attack on the consulate in Libya resulted in the deaths of 4 U.S. government employees, including U.S. Ambassador to Libya, J. Christopher Stevens. Concerning the Egyptian attack, CNN reported on September 12th that, quote, in Cairo, several men scaled the walls of the U.S. Embassy and tore down its American flag, according to CNN producer Mohammed Faid al-Fahmy, who was on the scene. Unquote. As of now, many are pointing to a movie entitled The Innocence of Muslims that depicted the Prophet Muhammad in an unflattering manner as the main reason behind both the Egyptian attack and the Libyan attack. However, there is much more under the surface. The film was directed by Sam Basil, who, according to Hearts, had gone into hiding since the violence occurred. However, it has been reported as of recent he has been taken in by California police for questioning. Basil stated that, and this is a quote from the Hearts article, he intended his film to be a provocative political statement condemning Islam, and he stated that, quote, Islam is a cancer. The article goes on to state that, quote, the film claims Muhammad was a fraud, and that it depicts Muhammad as a feckless philanderer who approved of child sexual abuse, among other overtly insulting claims that caused outrage. Unquote. These claims were entirely refuted in a recent Daily Beast article by Olga Mark-Davidson, a faculty member of the Institute for the Study of Muslim Societies and Civilizations at Boston University. However, Basil himself is not the true force behind the movie. Alex Kane wrote in a recent article at alternet.org, quote, by the end of the day on September 12th, the AP discovered that the person behind the film was an Egyptian Coptic Christian by the name of Nakula Basili Nakula. It didn't seem to be a real Sam Basil. The more information came out, the more it became clear that the origin of the film lay in an alliance with the members of the Egyptian Coptic Christian community, right-wing Christians, a well-funded network of Islamophobes in the U.S. As the post-9/11 dust settled, a small, loosely connected group of anti-Muslim activists worked in late states forward to become a full-blown network of Islamophobes across the U.S. that cut out propaganda about the impending takeover of the U.S. by Muslims who would oppose Sharia law. An important part of their message is that Christians in the Middle East were being persecuted and deserve the protection of their fellow Christians in the West. Of course, this does include Christians facing persecution from Israel's Jewish majority. Specifically, the Egyptian Coptic Christians were the focus, narrative to the 2011 Egyptian Revolution, conclusive of the fate of Copts in Egypt increased. While there are real fears for Copts in Egypt, churches have been burned and protests violently repressed by Egyptian security forces. Anti-Muslim activists have cynically exploited that grim reality. Coptic Christian leaders have denounced the film, which has endangered the community within Egypt. And so, a small number of Coptic Christians, by no means representative of the full Coptic community, have made alliances with right-wing evangelical Christians and virulent Islamophobes in the U.S. Unquote. Thus, the video came out from Basel, from a Coptic Christian seeking support from Western Christians. There is currently an ongoing battle of who is to blame for the violence. While it is entirely true that those who perpetrated violence, without a doubt, have the most blame in the situation, there must also be to blame on Makula and others, as the movie was purposefully made to insult the Muslim world, and had the movie not been made, the situation would have never occurred. And while some argue that the movie was an act of free speech, I'm pleased to read a rather interesting, informative article on the issue by Amitai Edzioni at nationalinterest.org, which states that there is a difference between having a right to say something and the notion that saying it is right. And personally, I believe that this situation, that quote, is quite true. But now, going to go to the attack on the Libyan consulate. It is now being reported in Libya's media that an Al-Qaeda-affiliated group may have been in the attacks. The New York Times reported that, quote, Islamist militants armed with anti-aircraft weapons and rocket-propelled grenades stormed the lightly defended U.S. diplomatic mission in Benghazi, Libya, late Tuesday, killing the American ambassador, 3 members of his staff, and raising questions about the radicalization of countries swept up in the Arab Spring. Unquote. And there may be a different reason behind these attacks, because while you have the mainstream media saying, oh, it was this movie that was put out that insulted Prophet Muhammad, and that caused all these protests and attacks at U.S. embassies and U.S. consulates in the Middle East and North African region, there are some who argue differently, such as Pepe Escobar. Pepe Escobar over Asia Times reported that Abu Yahya al-Libi, Al-Qaeda's number 2 man, was killed in a U.S. drone strike last year. This September, Arman al-Zawahiri, aka the Surgeon, released a 42-minute video special to celebrate the 11th anniversary of 9/11, and in this video he had admitted that al-Libi had in fact been killed. Escobar goes on to state that, quote, the immediate effect of al-Zawahiri's video, that an angry armed mob led by Islamist outfit Ansar al-Sharia set fire to the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. U.S. Ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stevens, was killed. It didn't matter that Stevens had been a hero of the NATO rebels who had liberated Libya, notoriously strangled Salafi jihadis of the al-Libi kind. Unquote. This ties in with the ongoing Islamic fervor in Libya. However, the fact that such fervor exists is quite unsurprising. We must remember that U.S. NATO alliance armed and supported Islamic militants during its war against the Gaddafi regime last year. While there were a lot of people saying, oh, they're freedom fighters and they're patriots and they're oh so wonderful. They're fighting for democracy. That was completely and utterly false, just like it's false that we didn't have troops there in Libya when we were fighting Gaddafi, just like it's false that we aren't arming and aiding the Syrian rebels that are going to overthrow Assad, and that the Syrian rebels are oh so wonderful and great and spectacular. There's a lot of media disinformation going on currently, but I digress. But on the issue of the U.S. and NATO arming Islamic militants last year against the Gaddafi regime, CBS News reported in March of 2011 that, quote, Admiral James Stavridis, NATO's Supreme Commander for Europe, said of Libya's rebel force, we have seen flickers in the intelligence of potential Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. Former CIA officer Bruce Riedel took things a step further, telling the Hindustan Times, there is no question that Al-Qaeda's Libyan franchise, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, is a part of the opposition. Has always been Gaddafi's biggest enemy, and his stronghold is Benghazi. What is unclear is how much of the opposition is Al-Qaeda/Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, 2% or 80%. And concerning Libya, most of the rebels who we were backing, they came from eastern Libya. And it was known by West Point, it was admitted by the Post, that many of those fighters in Libya who were fighting against Gaddafi, they have also fought against U.S. forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was admitted that from eastern Libya, a lot of forces, enemy forces, came into Afghanistan and Iraq to fight the U.S. and the NATO alliance. Why I am bringing up the fact of the U.S. having supported Libyan Islamists. Well, please keep in mind, however, I'm not saying that the U.S. are specifically on those who attacked the consulate. I'm just acknowledging that Al Qaeda and really Al Qaeda affiliate was in the opposition. So, situation in Libya is such now, the central government is still weak, thus extremist elements are still around and take advantage of protests to attack the U.S. consulate. The events surrounding the attack became more interesting when it was reported that the U.S. had warning signs that an attack was going to occur, but didn't do anything. The Telegraph stated on September 12th that, quote, according to the senior diplomatic sources, the U.S. State Department had credible information 48 hours before mobs charged the consulate in Benghazi, the embassy in Cairo, that American missions may be targeted, but no warnings were given for diplomats to go on high alert in a lockdown, under which movement is severely restricted. End quote. However, while the U.S. may have had that information, it doesn't seem that they knew how the attacks were going to be carried out or how severe they would be. According to Trend.az, U.S. State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland stated that the outer perimeter of the consulate was guarded by a local Libyan guard force and then a robust American security presence inside the compound. There were no U.S. Marines stationed at the Benghazi mission, which was not unusual. In response to these attacks, the U.S. has beefed up security as embassies around the world, with Obama saying that the U.S. was going to work with the Libyan government to find the perpetrators. Specifically in Libya, the Defense Department stated that, quote, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has authorized deployment of a Marine Corps fleet and a terrorism security team to Libya to protect the U.S. citizens there and secure the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. It seems that this situation is rather a complicated mix of interests and violence. I'll do my best to keep you abreast of what's going on. Amid all this turmoil and violence, I'd like to end the show with some good news. The Washington Post reported on September 12th that more and more Americans were leaving the banking system. The article states that, quote, in the aftermath of one of the worst recessions in history, more Americans have limited or no interaction with banks, instead relying on check cashers and payday lenders to manage their finances, according to a new federal report. Not only are these Americans more vulnerable to high fees and interest rates, but they are also cut out from credit to buy a car or a home or pay for college, a report from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation said, unquote. The FDIC report itself is titled 2011 FDIC National Survey, Fund Banked and Underbanked Households, will be linked to the show notes. The actual stats in the report noted that, once again this is a quote from the Washington Post article, 821,000 households opted out of the banking system from 2009 to 2011, and that the so-called unbanked population grew from 8.2% of U.S. households, grew to 8.2% of U.S. households, rather. That means that roughly 17 million adults are without a checking or savings account. Another 51 million adults have a bank account but use pawn shops, payday lenders, and or rent-to-own services, the FDIC said. This underbanked population has grown from 8.2% to 20.1% of households nationwide. Quote, this rejection of banks has been spurred mainly by the fact that people have no paying jobs, which means that they are unable to absorb fees given by banks. But it also means that it can also mean that they mistrust banks, and really, who can blame them, seeing the horrid job all the major banks did in playing into the financial crisis. On another level, however, this actually speaks volumes as to how the economy is actually doing. Despite the mainstream media pushing this false narrative, there is a recovery going on. The question that one might ask is, a recovery for whom exactly? However, if people can't even afford to deal with relatively small fees, what does that say about how much money they have to spend, the type of jobs that are currently in the market? Yet, due to this mistrust, people may finally begin to free themselves from the entrapment of the banking system and create an alternative to the current system in which they're consistently on the losing side. That's all for today. See you next week.